Welcome to Hawksong Weaving! Today I'm going to show you how to take the oddballs of wool that you find at local thrift stores and take them from this to this. A completely unique felted fabric that you can turn into so many different projects. I'm going to be using this for applique mushrooms. Life takes odd turns, but even tattered and worn yarn still has value. Tired joints and health flares don't have to stop the journey. Welcome to Hawksong Weaving, where all our paths are a little bit warped. So this started out with my adaptive warping method. Feel free to look at other videos of mine to see how that goes. I'm being careful to use wool or wool blends, specifically very strong wool content blends in this weaving, because I want it to be able to felt down more easily. Acrylic blends won't do that as well. You'll see here that I'm working on making sure that the right hand warp thread is the one that is going through the smaller little hole in the rigid heddle. There's probably a name for that. I'm brain fogged, so I'm not going to focus too much on it. There's so much vocabulary that goes into weaving, and yes, it is very important to respect where it comes from, the history behind that, but also it can be a major impediment into going into weaving and learning how to weave in general, so I try to keep things fairly easy on this channel. I'm glad that I was able to show y'all this angle, but honestly, I don't like looking underneath my neighbor's porch, so please ignore the firewood and sleds, etc. underneath their porch. I'm doing what I can here. Especially when you're working with different percentages of wool blends, it's good to know what type of wool blend you're working with for the warp especially, and to try to keep that fairly similar to each other, otherwise they will felt down at different rates. The wool percentage in the weft does not matter as much because this is going to be used for appliques, but if you want a more uniform felted material, then absolutely try to make sure that it's the same percentage throughout. But again, working with thrift store yarn, that's not always going to be the case. There's also almost certainly a word for it, but making sure that you have the same percentage or a very similar percentage of wool in your warp thread will also make sure that they don't bounce more. Again, there's probably a word for this, but the amount of spring back, the amount of tension that you're able to get onto a warp can drastically shift and affect how the weaving goes. So making sure that things are fairly similar when it comes to this particular type of warping. And just in general, no one likes having that, oh, okay, cool, the right side is very, very angular and the left side is having a time. When I tell people that I work exclusively with thrift store yarn, secondhand yarn, upcycled yarn, people will often, the first thing that they'll ask is, oh, so you take apart sweaters and blankets and things like that? And my answer to that is no, absolutely not. I know how much work goes into sweaters. I've knit one sweater in my entire life, and it was a time. No, I don't take apart blankets either. I've knit blankets before. My nephew has a blanket that I've knit for him. Those take ages. I'm not going to be taking those apart. I hope that those go to someone who can appreciate them. However, a lot of the times I will find partially finished knitting projects in and amongst the yarn that I do find at thrift stores. And again, I work with the oddballs, the odds and ends, and the weft thread that I'm currently working with is, in fact, one of those knitted projects. It seemed to be a mix of cotton embroidery floss and very, very intense wool, like very high percentage wool yarn. So it was an odd blend, to be sure, and I'm not entirely sure what the original knitter was intending this project to be. I unraveled it because it was partly finished, And I'm not entirely sure where they were headed with this, but now let's see how it felts down. Working with this type of yarn can be very interesting, and it can be very educational in how the different fibers interact with each other, what type of texture you're going to come out with, what the end product might be. You'll notice that I'm not worrying too much about the selvages. Usually my selvages, the ends, the sides of the weaving are much tidier than this, but I'm really just focusing on getting the weft onto the warp and just plowing through this. These are not going to be pretty, but these are going to be intended for getting that very unique felted fabric, and also learning along the way, figuring out what works best. And you can see what I mean by this in this white fluffy yarn. This was a very small oddball of mohair. It still has a lot of lanolin in it. It's going to felt up absolutely beautifully, and it's going to really tie those fibers together in the felting process. And it's just going to be absolutely delicious and soft and fuzzy once it's done. I want to say thank you for sticking with me this long. If you'd like to support the channel, a like or a follow means so much. It lets the algorithms know that you want to see this type of content. And even with our other artists in general, likes and follows and shares are absolutely free, and there can be a great way to support artists who are just trying to get their stuff in front of people. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm starting to upload some of my TikToks to YouTube Shorts, so keep an eye out for those as well. These felting projects are also fantastic for getting those little bits that are left over at the end of a warp. They're so few, but they're long enough that you don't want to use them as scrapping for stuffing or anything like that, but it's a good way to keep things out of the landfill. So many fibers, so much fast fashion ends in the landfill, and I hate it. And I love that this is something I can do to help keep these fibers out of the landfill, especially because I grew up as a homeschooler in a rural Vermont community. I know how much work it is to raise sheep. And sheep are mean. Chickens are mean, sheep are mean. I maintain that chickens are velociraptors who did not forget that they were dinosaurs, and they will pick out the most terrified homeschooler, and I have a vendetta against several long-dead chickens, but that's neither here nor there. It's a pain in the butt to raise sheep as well. I'm not letting this stuff go into a landfill. And time for a visit from Miss Penelope Calico. She was not happy with how my heart rate was. I've been diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Basically, heart go burr when it's not supposed to go burr, and I have a calico who is an unlicensed, untrained, everything, highly opinionated medical alert cat. She is one of the terrors of my life, but I would not give her up for the world because she's like one of those border collies that has assigned themselves the job of taking apart the couch when they're not being given an actual job. She has assigned herself the job of heart rate monitor, and she is very good at being a heart rate monitor. She's just very loud about it, which doesn't help the heart rate. Tying off the weaving, these scraps will end up in my scrappy sachets. I really pride myself on being zero waste with my weaving and with my product creation. Just, it's something that I can do to help. Also, Miss Penelope Calico has pica, which means that she eats things that are not food when she is stressed, and my existence stresses her out, so better to keep these scraps under lock and key, and they'll be useful, and they won't end up with an expensive trip to the vet. This project will get tossed into my washing machine at a very, very high temperature, the highest I can get, and I'm going to deliberately do several spin cycles with that so that the fibers get all tumbled about, and with the hot water and the agitation, voila, I'll get felt! And that'll be absolutely phenomenal. A really gorgeous piece of unique felt for me to use for projects. I prefer to do a bit of blocking while they're still damp and to let them air dry. That way they don't dry in bizarre wrinkly patterns. I'm cutting this out by eye, not really using a template. If you feel more comfortable using a template, absolutely use a template. Like everything in my videos, take what works and leave the rest. I sewed these on using an applique stitch, which is essentially a very, very dense zigzag stitch. Unfortunately, the vibrations of the sewing machine made a lot of this footage unusable and very, very shaky. I'm really sorry about that because it was good footage, or it would have been good footage, but such is filming while trying to do other things. I'm sewing the edges around, basically just getting this on the primary background fabric and trundling along. This is something that comes easier with practice, and thankfully it's a lot of fun to do and it's very, very satisfying. And that's how you take the oddballs of yarn and turn them into felted wool that you can then applique mushrooms with, or do anything else that strikes your fancy. More mushrooms, and thank you so much for spending time with Hawksong Weaving. I'm so incredibly glad for the odd turn your life took that got you here, and remember, we're all a little bit warped. I thought I'd close with some pictures of Hades' himbo being very cute with more thrift store yarn. I hope y'all have a good day.